The first ever national commercial program KTIB ever aired was American Country Countdown, starting in 1973. We recently caught up with Bob Kingsley, who has been the show's host since 1978, about his career and ACC's long-term success. American Country Countdown, and one of the top country music countdown shows in American radio history. It was, as we said, part of KTIB's established history. Mr. Bob Kingsley, how are you doing today?
William, I'm fine. Those are very kind words.
Well, you're very deserving of it, and without you, I don't think KTIB would have ever been the country success it became.
That is a nice thing for you to say.
Well, let's start from the beginning. Where are you from?
Actually, I was born in San Francisco, California.
Mm-hmm. Now, growing up in San Francisco, did you ever have the dreams as a kid of getting into broadcasting?
No, never crossed my mind. Never crossed my mind. Actually, I moved to Southern California probably about 7 or 8 and listened to a lot of, I heard the first rock and roll radio, at least at that point in Los Angeles, KFWV. And while I enjoyed it, it never once crossed my mind to work in a radio station.
Well, was there any particular thing you wanted to be when you were growing up?
I think a race car driver was what I had on my mind.
Wow.
Yeah, I really enjoyed driving, and fast. It's probably, considering my bad luck in various and sundry things, it's probably a good thing I didn't, we might not be having this conversation now. But that was probably my first thought. So how does
a young man from San Francisco that wanted to become a race car driver ended up in the wonderful world of radio?
Actually, I joined the Air Force, and they sent me to Iceland, and I was working out of the motor pool. And I wasn't necessarily driving race cars, but I was driving those deuce and a halves and some M7s, and having a good time. I think I was 18 then. And one day I ended up going over to Armed Forces Radio, and asked me to sit down and read some copy. And this was all just a big fun whim kind of thing, And I do kind of remember reading that copy, and I massacred it. They just ripped some news off the AP wire, and it was just awful. But about 3 days later, they called and told me I was in Special Services. I'm going to work for Armed Forces Radio. So they must have really been scraping the bottom of the barrel,
Wow. Well, so I take it from your days in the military. Well, first of all, how long did you stay in the military?
3 years.
3 years.
Oh, yeah. When I came back, when they shipped, because I spent about the next 10 months working for Armed Forces Radio, and but then I realized that's exactly what I wanted to do.
How long of a journey was it from getting out of the military to eventually landing on your feet with American Country Countdown?
It was about a 15-year, about 14 years.
Mm-hmm. So I take it I was going to say you probably moved around a lot.
I did. Oh, yeah. Yep. I pretty well covered the 7 western states.
Mm-hmm. And how often did you have to move?
Oh, boy, regularly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you in those days, there was no money, and there was, sometimes you had to even give some of it back, and, you'd go somewhere else for $5 more.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, these were all relatively small markets.
So, how did you get hooked up with American Country Countdown?
It was early '74, and I had just been fired from KFI Radio in LA, where I was doing an overnight. They were doing what they called in those days block programming,
mm-hmm.
and I had the country music section, which was 11 to 4. I followed Paul Compton in a jazz show, and it was one of the most fascinating times. Anyway, then I've forgotten now who owned it and who bought it, but the new owners decided they didn't want to do any more country music, so that was the end of that. And I was starting to put tapes together and do what I'd always done, get back on the road and try to find a home. And one day I got a call from Tom Rounds, who owned Watermark Productions in North Hollywood, and he also, at that time they had one radio program which was a pretty successful program, American Top 40 with Casey Kasem, and they were thinking about doing the same thing with a country show. And as a matter of fact, they had already started doing that, and Casey had brought in a fellow he was a longtime friend with, a fellow named Don Bowman, who was really a country music comedian, and actually a pretty funny fellow. But they had decided that they needed somebody with a little bit of background. And fortunately, you know how things work, man. Somebody mentioned Tom Rounds was talking with somebody, and a record promotion guy had mentioned my name to him as somebody that he knew, that was involved with country music. And he called me, I went in, and we visited, and I started as the producer in April of 1974.
Wow. Now, I take it, based on the notes I took before I came in, it wouldn't be but another 4 years before you actually took over as host, correct?
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. At that point, I was thinking, I've been in and out of so many radio stations, and I had a bunch of ideas for doing. And I thought, well, this is great to get hooked up with Watermark. I'll have an opportunity to come up with some special programming. And it ended up, as strange as it may seem, for a 4-hour radio program, I mean, it took more work than I ever even that I could ever have imagined. But I just produced it for those for 4 years, and then Don decided that he was going to go on the road, and he was either working with Waylon or he was always working with Willie, and Willie wanted to come full time, and he did. And so I started looking around for somebody to do it. And in the meantime, I had sat in a couple times. I thought, this is a pretty interesting deal, because I had grown up loving countdowns. I mean, I worked in a market that was kind of about a mile from my house when I was a kid, and I was a box boy, and I would go out, particularly on Saturday mornings when they ran the countdown in L.A. First one I ever remember hearing. And man, I just get in somebody's car and turn the radio on and see who was in the top 10. But I've always been fascinated and thoroughly entertained by countdowns. So it was great. We kind of revamped things a little bit and started interjecting our own kind of thoughts into programming. It started out basically with just me and a fellow named Pat Shields, who was the head writer. And I mean, I think back, and it was 3 hours when we first started, and it was just about as tough as anything I can remember, trying to fill those 3 hours with anything that was interesting.
Is it still as much work for you now as it was 25 years ago?
Oh yeah. But I've got a good crew of people. Personally, it's not as much work. I still produce the show, so I kind of coordinate everybody. I live in Texas. The head writer and our second writer and the director and our statistician live on the West Coast, still live out in California. I do most all the interviews here in Texas, and the show is really an interview-based program. It just couldn't be done without doing it that way. Back in the beginning, it was at a time when a lot of people were not too thrilled about doing interviews. It's just something that really wasn't done a great deal. Waylon, Willie, Cash, and it was very, very difficult to get them to sit with you. So we had to we just made things up. I'm just joking. That's just a joke. Never made anything up. But it was hard to put together things that, like I said, that would be interesting. If with short of the interview, you get press releases and you hear stories and they have to call and make sure it was true and so on, and then write it. And today it's even more complicated because now I do a lot of interviews and I use a lot of interviews on the air, and the timing is difficult because the records. We were just talking about this last week. A lot of the records are real long. You only have X amount of minutes every hour, so. I would say, I've got a long way to answer your question, Wayne, but I would say the biggest challenge of all is trying to find something new and interesting to say about the people that are in the 40, and all with a positive bent. I mean, there's stories that don't flow that way that we don't do. So it's always a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Sounds a lot like weather forecasting. So.
Yeah, something like that. Only I bet I'm right more than you are.
Oh, sure. Well, you see, people don't know when you have a meteorology degree, the only thing it's good for is to be a judge on the Gong Show. So.
Okay. Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Well, and this leads to my next question. Without sounding cynical, are you surprised that American Country Countdown has been very successful for so long?
Yes. Yes. At certain times, it absolutely does. When I see certain ratings, I'm always kind of blown, you know, that there's that many people that still listen. And but the secret to it has nothing to do with me. The secret to it is that the people who are involved in the writing of this radio program all have a keen interest in the acts, and there's enough new acts that come along that keep everybody's mind, you know, from excited and without going stale. And a lot of interesting people. I'm not saying that everybody is fascinating, but there are enough, you know, and that there are good speakers that tell great stories and are, you know, colorful. And Lord knows that the more colorful, the more fun that it is to talk about. So. I'm not surprised from the standpoint that people like to know, and I got to tell you, the thing that we work the hardest at is, again, finding new and interesting things to say about somebody. And I always, you know, I'm always talking to I find one person, normally regarding almost every song, and it could be people I've met or just somebody I saw or, you know, somebody I know is interested in that particular person that I'm talking, and trying to say interesting things, and do bios without it sounding too, you know, too bio-ish, too dull, and give them enough information that they can now put together some kind of personality with a song. And I really think that's the secret to it. I mean, I really do. I think people like to know about it, particularly the genre that we're talking about, country music.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's time for the tough question of the night. And I understand if you won't be able to answer it because I'm sure you'd have a lot of memories to go through. But here it is. Was there ever a song you played on American Country Countdown that you absolutely didn't like when you first heard it?
You know, I listen to a lot of music every week. And there's certain times, you know, the truth is today, and I would say probably, I don't know, the last 10, 12 years, maybe more, 15 years, the album thing has turned around so much that people don't have one hit and then put 10 other hits in there of other people's. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's when most of these artists go in to do an album, they go in to do an original album. They may do a you know, a cover of something they really like, but that's the reason for it. I mean, there's so much good music that what I do hear, let me say this, but I don't know that I hear anything. There may be something sometimes that seems way out of the format to me, and I may sit here and wonder, what is this about? You know, why? And not that it's necessarily a bad record, but maybe they may be looking at the wrong format. And then I'll hear it, you know, like anything, a hit is a hit. And a lot of times you hear something for the 25th time, and it starts to grow on you. You know, or sometimes it's the third or fourth time, and it starts to grow on you.
I tell you what, that is the best answer. If you ever run for president, I'm voting for you.
Okay.
But I will confess mine to you. Mine, from the early 80s, a song I didn't like when I first heard it because I couldn't understand it was, I think it was called "We're Gonna Hire a Wino to Decorate Our Home."
Oh, yeah, Lefty Frizzell's brother.
Right.
And Shelley West?
Right, I think so.
I remember that song.
Right, that's the only real one that stands out in my mind.
Yeah, I've got, you know, there's a few, but it's almost always, you know, interestingly enough, that could have come close, but I ended up liking that record.
Mm-hmm.
And because I am so tuned into hits, you know, hit radio, and there are those who would prefer to not ever hear a hit and, you know, just go to album stuff, which is why, you know, there's a lot of successful album radio stations. But I just am very hit-oriented. Mm-hmm. And when something, even if it was something I wasn't crazy about, or let me say I wouldn't go out and spend, whatever it takes to buy the single. After a little bit, it can really, then I start thinking about the album. I mean, it just grows on you.
Right. Now, this one may be not as tough, but I think it'd be an interesting answer. Is there a country song, whether or not it is aired on American Country Countdown, that is one of your all-time favorites?
Oh, I think everybody's got all-time favorites, but mine change. It's a matter of, we're very fortunate here in this part of the world, here in North Texas. There's 5 radio stations that play country music in one form or another that I can listen to at any given time of the day or night. And I was listening to 92.1, which is the oldie station, and I hadn't heard Soft Rain by Ray Price in, I don't know, it's got to be somewhere in the late 60s. And I was knocked out about how great it sounded. And then I came right back over to KSCS, which is a contemporary radio station, and I heard Toby Keith, and I thought, man, it just sounds so good. So, it just depends on the moment. Sometimes it's fun to listen to the way things were and the way things sounded years and years ago, but I love a great deal. I think Keith Urban is one of the greatest artists I've ever seen and or heard in my life. There's a lot of, and George Strait. Go back to the beginnings of that career, and he's still making great music today. So one song, I'd never be able to narrow it down.
Okay.
And it's like trying to put together. You ever put together a top 10 list to go on a desert island with? That is a tough thing to do, particularly if you think you're going to be there. Now, what do I want to hear over and over and over again? That's one of the luxuries of having a good library. Not faced with that, but that's a hard question.
Okay, but
even though I don't have an answer. As far as one song, I've been listening to a bunch of Cash stuff the last couple of weeks, and some of that early Sun stuff, some of the greatest music I ever heard. So it varies from day to day.
Well, now one more
for an answer, William.
Hey, listen, I tell you what, just talking to you, our listeners, this is going to be plenty, pleasant enough.
I hope so.
Well, I am going to vote for you for president, so it doesn't matter.
I don't think you're going to have to worry about it, but I appreciate the confidence.
Before we go, I want to let all listeners know that, of course, your show, even though unfortunately it's not on KTIB anymore, you're still on. How many stations across the country?
About 600.
600, and if anybody wants any information, and I hope I memorized it right, is your official website ACCtop40.com?
That's the one.
Okay, and if anybody wants to email Bob Kingsley or more information about where you can pick up American Country Countdown, we'll greatly appreciate them doing so. And I bet you every day on the website you probably get so many emails and interesting comments from
We get a few, but we answer them all. So if somebody would like to, we'd love to hear from you.
All right. Well, Bob Kingsley, before we go, is there anything you'd like to say to all our lovely listeners out there?
No, I hope they've enjoyed it. I hope that 50 years of one radio station is an amazing thing and I know this has been a tremendous amount of work on your part, but putting together a whole, this would be something that would probably be really interesting to listen to as much as I love radio, and I wish you and KTIB the very, very best, William.
Bob Kingsley and American Country Countdown, 2 success stories partly responsible for KTIB's well-earned place in broadcast.